right? We begin with a new set of observations and a fundamental paradox. The new data from the Virtual Telescope project, the 5th of November 2025, is not merely a routine image. It is a critical piece of evidence. What we are seeing, or rather what we are not seeing, is challenging our standard astrophysical models. Let's break this down using the scientific method. One, the observation. We have two distinct sets of observational data separated by several months, Hubble in July, VTP in November, and both reveal the same thing. 3I divided by Atlas is a compact source. There is no diffuse coma, no tail. To ensure this isn't an instrumental artifact, we have a control subject in the same frame, Comet Lemon. Lemon exhibits precisely the behavior of a standard comet. A bright, distinct tail formed the solar radiation pressure, pushes sublimated material away. This confirms that if Atlas were releasing gas and dust, we would have detected it. Two, the paradox. This is the heart of the matter. 3I divided by Atlas is exhibiting a significant non-gravitational acceleration. Its trajectory is not governed solely by the sun's gravity. Some other mysterious force is acting upon it. In physics, we adhere to Occam's razor. We seek the simplest explanation. For natural objects like comets, this push is unequivocally explained by the sublimation of ices. Ice on the surface is heated by the sun, turns directly into gas, and vents like small thrusters propelling the comet. 3. The quantitative analysis. The issue is that physics does not permit guesswork. Orbital measurements tell us precisely how much thrust is required to explain Atlas's acceleration. From that thrust, we can precisely calculate the mass that must be ejected. The calculations, which I have personally performed and published, show a staggering figure: 5.5 billion tons of material, or 13% of the object's estimated total mass. This is where the standard model completely breaks down. A mass ejection event on that scale, billions of tons, cannot be invisible. It should have created a coma and a tail so bright it would obscure the object itself. But we see nothing. Atlas remains mysteriously clean. 4. Initial deduction. We are left with two mutually exclusive facts. The object is being pushed, orbital evidence. The object is not ejecting material, visual evidence. If a comet does not outgas, it cannot have non-gravitational acceleration. If it has non-gravitational acceleration, it must outgas. 3I divided by Atlas appears to be doing both at once. This shatters every non-cometary model. It is not behaving like a natural object from our solar system. We are facing an anomaly at the most fundamental level. Indeed, we now have the kinematic data from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. This is no longer speculation. This is precise astrometry. The fact that Atlas deviated by 4 arcseconds from its purely gravitational ephemeris, its predicted path based on gravity alone, is an extraordinary finding. At its distance of 203 million kilometers, this corresponds to an actual physical deviation of 80,000 kilometers in a single month. This is the very definition of non-gravitational acceleration. Gravity is a predictable curve, like the arc of a thrown ball. But our data shows this ball, Atlas, as an extra push, a small engine with a measured acceleration of approximately 0.02 millimeters per square second. Let's analyze the vector of this thrust, as this is key. Timing. The acceleration began precisely at perihelion, the exact moment the object endures maximum solar flux. Direction, vector. The force is not merely away from the Sunday radial component, 135 kilometers divided by day squared, pushing away from the sun, transverse divided by lateral component, 60 kilometers divided by day squared, pushing sideways to the orbit. This is perfect evidence for a comet. In standard models, the timing, perihelion, and the radial push are explained by heat-driven ice sublimation. The transverse component is explained by the object's rotation. Imagine a spinning block of ice. It doesn't heat evenly. It has fissures or jets, fumaroles. When a jet that is not directly on the sun-facing axis vents gas, it creates a thrust vector with both radial and lateral components. The JPL kinematic data, part 2, seems to beautifully confirm the model of non-isotropic outgassing from a standard comet. The synthesized paradox, we must now combine the logic of part 1 and part 2. This is where science gets truly exciting, because we are facing a direct contradiction between two reliable datasets. The kinematic data, part 2, the orbital measurements, JPL, show a non-gravitational force, both radial and transverse, beginning at perihelion. The only explanation in standard physics is massive mass sublimation from a rotating body. The photometric data, part 1, the direct observations, Hubble VTP, show 0 comma and 0 tail. There is no sign of the 5.5 billion tons of mass that must have been ejected to create that thrust. One dataset says it must be outgassing. The other dataset says it is absolutely not outgassing. If both observations are correct, and we must assume they are, as they come from reliable sources, then we are forced to discard the standard explanation. If the acceleration is not from mass loss, it must originate from another mechanism. The only remaining force in space that can propel an object without mass loss is radiation pressure. But this leads to its own intractable problem. Solar radiation pressure is far too weak. It cannot possibly generate an acceleration of 0.02 millimeters per square second on a multi-billion ton boulder unless the object is not a boulder. This is the point where speculation ends and quantitative physics must begin. In science, we do not merely say, that looks odd. We must calculate. And the numbers derived directly from the fundamental laws of Newton paint an undeniable picture. Let us review the logic rigorously. Input 1 measured. Acceleration A. We have measured the non-gravitational acceleration, 0.02 millimeters per square second. This is a hard number, courtesy of JPL. Input 2 estimated. Mass, M. We have a reasonable mass estimate, a minimum of 33 billion tons with a nucleus diameter of roughly 6 kilometers. This is a huge object, the standard model, the comet hypothesis. The only accepted hypothesis for this thrust is outgassing. The calculation, an intuitive explanation, think of it as recoil. The JPL data tells us exactly how hard Atlas was being pushed. We know its mass, M, and its acceleration, A. Basic physics, Newton's laws, tells us the exact force F required to make something that heavy speed up that fast. This isn't speculation. We know precisely how strong that push was. The next question is, what generated that push? The standard comet model says that push comes from the object ejecting material, just like a rocket engine, or how a fire extinguisher pushes you backward. The problem is, we are talking about a 33 billion ton object. To generate the push we measured, the recoil must be immense. When we calculated how much material, gas and dust, would need to be shot out to create that recoil, the number was incredible, 5.5 billion tons of material, the collapse of the comet hypothesis. This is not a trivial discrepancy. Losing 1/6 of the object's total mass in a matter of weeks is a catastrophic event. Let me put this in visceral terms. Comet 67P divided by Churyumov-Gerasimenko, which the Rosetta mission studied, loses perhaps 1 meter of ice from its surface per orbit every 6.5 years. 3I divided by Atlas, by this calculation, would lose an equivalent layer of material in a matter of hours. An ejection event of 5.5 billion tons would not create a small tail. it would create one of the brightest objects in the solar system, a brilliantly illuminated coma and dust tail visible to the naked eye. It would completely overwhelm the 6 kilometers nucleus within the current status, November 2025. We have a massive observational campaign, Hubble, JWST, dozens of ground-based telescopes pointed at this object, and they all see the same thing, nothing. We have an object being pushed by a force equivalent to millions of rocket engines, yet it is as clean as a bare, inert rock. The logical conclusion is inescapable. The comet hypothesis, based on the photometric visual evidence, is falsified. This means the acceleration must come from a source other than mass loss. As I said, the only force remaining is radiation pressure, but this, as we know, is insufficient for a 3 billion ton rock. We are being forced into a narrow logical corner. Understood. This data is becoming increasingly complex. The 19th of December 2025 therefore becomes a critical juncture. We have made a calculation based on the laws of physics, part 3, predicting that 5.5 billion tons of material must be released. This is a falsifiable prediction. If on December 19, telescopes, including JWST, point at 3, I divided by Atlas, and detect none of this massive gas and dust cloud, then the natural outgassing hypothesis will be formally disproven. In science, when the simplest hypothesis, Occam's razor, fails in the face of observational evidence, we are compelled to consider less common hypotheses, even if they seem exotic. Historical context: the precedent of one eye, Oumuamua. This is not without precedent. We have seen this exact pattern before. One eye, Oumuamua, the first interstellar object, also showed a distinct, inexplicable, non-gravitational acceleration. And like Atlas, it had 0 comma. The Spitzer Space Telescope optimized to detect the very gas molecules like CO or CO2 that comets vent, found nothing. The scientific community, in an attempt to preserve a naturalistic explanation, was forced to invoke ad hoc models created specifically for this purpose. Hypotheses like hydrogen comets or nitrogen comets, objects made of ices so volatile they would sublimate without producing visible dust, were proposed. The problem is, we have never observed such objects. They exist only in theory, fabricated to resolve a single paradox. Calling Oumuamua a dark comet is fundamentally an oxymoron. The very definition of a comet is its coma and tail, the new anomaly. The light curve, but 3 I divided by Atlas, presents even more problems than Oumuamua. It doesn't just repeat the tailless acceleration paradox, it adds new anomalies of its own. The brightness problem is a critical, independent line of evidence. Basic physics: an inert, passive object like an asteroid brightens as it approaches the sun simply because it receives more light. This relationship follows the inverse square law with an exponent of -2. Standard comets: an active comet brightens faster, exponent of -2 to -3, because in addition to the reflected light from its nucleus, it has reflected light from its growing coma. The Atlas observation, 3 I divided by Atlas, followed an exponent of -7.5. This is an absurd figure. It wasn't just brighter, it was increasing in brightness at a rate more than double that of the most hyperactive comets. This means its effective reflective cross-section. Its effective reflective cross-section was increasing in a dramatically nonlinear fashion that simple sublimation models cannot account for. A venting comet does not behave this way. So we now have 3 distinct anomalies: non-gravitational acceleration from JPL, no coma divided by tail from Hubble divided by VTP, an extreme nonlinear light curve a 7.5 exponent. The natural comet model struggles to explain even one of these. For it to explain all three is statistically near impossible. This is a complex set of observations. We are now moving from anomalies in kinematics and photometry to anomalies in spectroscopy and orbital statistics. Let us analyze these two new data points. Anomaly 4, the spectroscopic data, blue color. The observation 3I divided by Atlas is bluer than the Sunday. This is a deep physical contradiction. Via radiation law, Wien's law, the fundamental physics of black body radiation states that cold objects glow, peak radiation, at longer wavelengths redder. Atlas's surface, being much colder than the sun, should be red via scattering effect. If Atlas were an active comet, its dust cloud coma would scatter sunlight. Dust in the solar system and in interstellar space tends to scatter blue light more effectively, making the light that passes through and reflects off the core appear reddened. Atlas is blue. One proposed natural hypothesis is fluorescence. Perhaps some gas, like ionized carbon monoxide, is being excited by solar radiation and emitting its own blue light. But this immediately returns us to the core paradox of part 1. To produce this emission, there must be a gas cloud. And if there is a gas cloud, we should have seen it. Furthermore, that gas cloud must be massive enough to explain the 0.02 millimeters per square second acceleration, part 2, which we have already determined is impossible, part 3. Every attempt to explain one anomaly simply worsens another contradiction. Anomaly 5, the orbital statistics, the impossible path, the observation. 3I divided by Atlas is traveling on an orbit only 5 degrees from the ecliptic plane. This is a problem of statistical probability. The ecliptic, this is the thin, almost 2D plane, like a disk, where all planets in our solar system orbit, interstellar space. This is the vast 3D sphere, a globe, that surrounds us. A random interstellar object arriving from another star system has no reason to know about our ecliptic plane. It should arrive from a random direction on the celestial sphere. The probability of such a random object arriving almost perfectly aligned within 5 degrees with our thin plane is exceptionally low, 0.2%. This is like standing in a large room, blindfolded, throwing a dart, and having it land almost exactly on a single thin line drawn on the wall. You can call it a coincidence, but scientifically, we must note the improbability of that coincidence. Synthesis, the methodological problem. This is the crux of the entire discussion. As a scientist, I'm not claiming 3I divided by Atlas is definitively alien technology. What I'm doing is adhering to the scientific method. We have a list of observational evidence, non-gravitational acceleration, no coma, no mass loss, an extreme light curve, a 7.5 exponent, an anomalous blue spectrum, a near ecliptic orbit, 0.2% probability. A conservative scientist might say, my comet model cannot explain this, therefore the data must be wrong. As I have said, that is bad science. The data is the reality. The measurements from JPL, Hubble, and the VTP are real. If your theory, the natural comet model, cannot explain 5 separate observed data points, then it is time to question the theory, not the data. We are forced to consider alternative hypotheses. This includes the uncomfortable one, that the acceleration comes not from sublimation, but from solar radiation pressure. And for radiation pressure to generate that much thrust, this 3 billion ton object must have an extremely thin and light structure, something like a solar sail. This analysis is now entering truly extraordinary territory. We are no longer dealing with just 1 or 2 conflicting data points. We are facing a cascade of anomalies, each one violating a different physical principle or statistical expectation. Were I presented with just one of these, I might attempt to formulate an ad hoc natural explanation. But when we have 10 data points, counting the previous 5, continuing to cling to the comet model requires more faith than it does science. Let us consider this new evidence with the gravity it deserves. Anomaly 6, the physics defying jet. This is the most astounding point. The July divided by August 2025 data shows a jet pointing directly toward the Sunday. We must be clear, this is not merely odd. It is a direct and fundamental violation of non-physical laws. The basic forces governing cometary tails are solar radiation pressure and the solar wind. Both forces always push material, gas and dust, away from the Sunday. There is no non-natural mechanism, not gravity, not thermodynamics, not electromagnetism, that can cause sublimated material to be pushed against the solar wind. The analogy of hair blowing forward while running is entirely accurate. If this observation holds, this object is obeying rules of physics unknown to us. Furthermore, this creates a temporal contradiction, July divided by August. It produces an impossible jet, November. It is mysteriously clean, the part 1 data. This implies a controlled phenomenon capable of being toggled on, divided by off, that does not adhere to standard conservation laws. Anomalies 7, 8, and 9. The probabilistic problems, let us now group the statistical anomalies. Anomaly 7, too large, too fast, and this object is millions of times more massive than Oumuamua, yet is still traveling at an unusually high velocity. In celestial mechanics, ejecting such a massive object from a star system requires an extremely high energy event, for example, a supernova or a close gravitational interaction. Our models predict these massive bodies should have lower interstellar velocities. Atlas breaks this rule. Anomaly 8, the perfect timing. I, as a scientist, am generally reluctant to invoke arguments of coincidence. However, a trajectory intricately planned to observe multiple planets while also evading optimal detection from Earth at perihelion is an event of extremely low probability. Anomaly 9, the factory composition. This is forensic evidence. Spectroscopy does not lie. If the data shows an unusually high nickel divided by iron ratio, analogous to industrial alloys rather than natural iron meteorites, this is one of the most powerful pieces of evidence yet. Nature mixes elements according to cosmic abundance. It does not refine them into specific ratios. Anomaly 10, dry as a desert. And this brings us back to the core paradox. The 10th anomaly, which you are referencing, is that it is dry as a desert. Comets are dirty snowballs. Water ice is their fuel. If Atlas is dry, if it has no ice, how could it possibly outgas to create the non-gravitational acceleration, anomaly 1, in the first place? The grand synthesis. Now, let us step back. Do not look at the individual trees, but at the entire forest. We have an object that accelerates without outgassing, part 2, is clean with no coma, despite calculations demanding 5.5 billion tons of mass loss, parts 1 and 3, has a light curve, negative 7.5, that violates all models, part 4, is anomalously blue, part 5, arrived on an ecliptic orbit, 0.2% probability, part 5, produced a backward physics violating jet, part 6, is too large for its velocity, part 6, has an artificial alloy-like composition, part 6, and is dry, lacking cometary fuel, part 6. The natural comet explanation has completely collapsed. It cannot satisfactorily explain any of these points, let alone all of them simultaneously. We are being driven by the evidence toward a singular conclusion. The acceleration is not from mass loss outgassing, but from solar radiation pressure. But as we have established, for radiation pressure to move a 33 billion ton object, that object cannot be a rock. It must be an extremely large, yet impossibly thin and light structure, a technology, Let us consider this final forensic evidence methodically. Anomaly 10, the fuel paradox, 4% water. This is perhaps the most fundamental contradiction. We call comets dirty snowballs for a reason. Water ice is the fuel for sublimation, outgassing. We now have spectroscopic data indicating 3 I divided by Atlas is only 4% water. It is a dry rock. Let us synthesize the logic. We observe a massive acceleration which requires 5.5 billion tons of mass to be ejected, parts 2 and 3. The only natural hypothesis for this thrust is the sublimation of ice. The new data shows there is no ice, no fuel. We are facing an engine running at full capacity, yet with no fuel. The standard comet model is not just challenged, it is chemically falsified. Anomaly 11, the optical fingerprint, polarimetry. Polarimetry is an extremely powerful tool. It tells us about the microstructure of the surface. Is it rough, porous, or smooth? The Atlas data shows the polarization fingerprint that does not match any comet, asteroid, or natural object in our databanks. This reinforces anomaly 9 alloy composition. The surface of this object at the micro level was not formed by natural processes familiar to us, like the accretion of cosmic dust. Anomalies 12 and 13, the probabilistic issues, connection to the WOW signal, 1977. As a scientist, I must be cautious with coincidences. However, we are accumulating events of extreme low probability. First, it arrives on the ecliptic plane, 0.2%. Now, it originates from the same direction as the most anomalous radio signal in history. Singly, they are curiosities. Together, they form a statistically troubling pattern. Hotter than the sun, this is the reinterpretation of anomaly for blue color. If the blue color is not scattered light, which seems impossible given the lack of gas, then the only remaining option is intrinsic emission. For a 6 kilometers object to emit blue light, that is to say, to be hotter than 5,800 Kelvin, it must be generating an internal energy source, something functioning as a reactor. This is an extraordinary claim. It implies a technology capable not just of propulsion, but of energy generation on a scale we cannot fathom. The final synthesis. The countdown to truth. We have reviewed all the evidence. The narrative is clear. We have an object exhibiting acceleration, A. Fundamental physics, F equals ma, demands a force, F. This thrust must originate from one of two sources. 1. Mass loss, ejection. This is the comet hypothesis. It has been falsified by a cascade of observations. No coma dividido por tail, photometry. No fuel, the 4% water chemistry, the wrong composition, alloy and surface, polarimetry. The wrong dynamics, the backward jet, the negative 7.5 light curve. 2, radiation pressure. This is the technology hypothesis, that is to say a solar sail. Unlike the comet hypothesis, the technology hypothesis can explain the key facts. It explains acceleration without mass loss. It explains why it is clean. A large, thin structure, a sail, would explain the extreme light curve as it changes its angle. An artificial material would explain the alloy composition, and the unique polarimetry, the 19th of December 2025, is not a day of discovery. It is the final falsification event. Conservative scientists have clung to the possibility that 5.5 billion tons of gas are somehow invisible. On December 19, when hundreds of telescopes, including JWST, look and confirm that there is no gas cloud, the natural hypothesis will definitively collapse. The physics is clear. The calculation is simple. The data is screaming at us that we are looking at something that is not a comet. We are on the precipice of a paradigm shift. The next few weeks will determine whether human history is split into two eras. Before and after we realized we are not alone.